After studying this module, you shall be able to know about the psychology behind drug addiction, that is, addiction psychology, the disease model of addiction, psychological dependence, and the significant relationship between drugs and mental health. The word addiction is used in several different ways. One definition describes physical addiction. This is a biological state in which the body adapts to the presence of a drug so that the drug no longer has the same effect, otherwise known as tolerance. Another form of physical addiction is the phenomena of overreaction by the brain to drugs or to cues associated with the drugs. An alcoholic walking into a bar, for instance, will feel an extra pull to have a drink because of these cues. Addiction is a condition that results when a person ingests a substance or engages in an activity that can be pleasurable, but the continuation of which becomes compulsive and interferes with the ordinary life responsibilities such as work, relationships, or health. Users may not be aware that their behavior is out of control and causing problems for themselves and others. When referring to any kind of addiction, it is important to recognize that its cause is not simply a search for pleasure and that addiction has nothing to do with one's morality or strength of character. Experts debate whether addiction is a disease or a true mental illness, whether drug dependence and addiction mean the same thing, and many other aspects of addiction. Such debates are not likely to be resolved soon, but the lack of resolution does not preclude the effective treatment. Addiction could broadly be explained as a progressive disease and psychiatric disorder that is defined by the American Society of Addiction Medicine as a primary chronic disease of brain reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry. It is characterized by the inability to control behavior. It creates a dysfunctional emotional response and it affects the user's ability to abstain from the substance or behavior consistently. Psychology today defines addiction as a state that can occur when a person either consumes a substance such as nicotine, cocaine, etc., or engages in an activity such as gambling or such related things. There are some characteristic features of addiction. The behavior provides a rapid and potent means of altering mood, thoughts, and sensations of a person resulting from the physiology and learned expectations. The term addiction in context of drugs is a compulsive need to use drugs in order to function normally. When such substances are unobtainable, the user suffers from withdrawal symptoms. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, that is DSM-4, does not use the word addiction at all. Instead, it uses the term substance dependence for explaining such a condition. Substance dependence can be diagnosed with physiological dependence, evidence of tolerance or withdrawal, or without physiological dependence. One way to differentiate the types of addiction is to consider two categories of dependence. First is physical dependence, characterized by symptoms of withdrawal and second is psychological dependence. Addictions often have both physical as well as the psychological components. Physical addiction and dependency on the substance is defined by the appearance of characteristic withdrawal symptoms when the drug is suddenly discontinued. Opiates, cocaine, barbiturates, hallucinogens, benzodiazepines, alcohol, nicotine, and a variety of more modern synthetic drugs are well known for their ability to induce physical dependence and addiction. While physical dependency can be a major factor in the psychology of addiction, the primary attribute of an addictive drug in its ability to induce euphoria while causing harm. The speed with which a given individual becomes addicted varies with the type of addiction and the frequency of addictive behavior and the individual himself or herself. For example, some alcoholics report they exhibited alcoholic tendencies from the moment of first intoxication, while most people can drink socially without ever becoming addicted. Because of this variation, some people hypothesize that physical dependency and addiction are in large part genetically moderated. Nicotine and caffeine are the two most addictive psychoactive substances. Psychological addiction, as opposed to physiological addiction, is a person's need to use drug or engage in a behavior out of desire for the effect it promotes rather than to relieve the withdrawal symptoms. Instead of an actual physiological dependence on a drug such as heroin, psychological addiction usually develops out of habits that relieve symptoms of loneliness, anxiety, depression, and feelings of worthlessness. As the drug and or the behavior is indulged, it becomes associated with the release of pleasure and avoidance of pain, and a cycle is started that is similar to the physiological addiction. This cycle is often very difficult to break. It is quite common for an addict to express the desire to stop the behavior but find that they are unable to stop the addictive behavior. Now we will study about the addictive potential. The addictive potential of a drug varies from substance to substance and from individual to individual. Dose, frequency, pharmacokinetics of a particular substance, routes of administration, and time are critical factors for developing a drug addiction. An article published in The Lancet compared the harm and addiction of about 20 drugs using a scale ranging from 0 to 3 for physical addiction, psychological addiction, and pleasure to create a mean score for addiction. The results have been shown in this table, where in one column we have the various drugs such as heroin, cocaine, tobacco, barbiturates, alcohol, benzodiazepines, amphetamine, and cannabis. And in the next columns we have the mean, the pleasure values, the psychological dependence, and the physical dependence values. Now we will study about the disease model of addiction. According to the new disease model, addiction is a disease of choice. That is, it is a disorder of the parts of the brain necessary to make proper decisions. An understanding of the impact that genes, reward, memory, stress, and choice is necessary to explain the disease model of addiction. It relies upon certain standards. First, starting with genetic. The genetic makeup of an individual determines how he or she responds to a specific drug. What causes an individual to be more prone to addiction is their genetic makeup. Next is the reward. Increased dopamine is correlated with increased pleasure. For that reason, dopamine plays a significant role in reinforcing experiences. When an individual uses a drug, there may be a surge of dopamine in the midbrain, which tells that brain the drug is better than expected. Next is memory. The neurochemical glutamate plays a critical role in memory consolidation. When an addict discovers an addicting behavior, glutamate plays a role in drug seeking, thus creating the addiction. Stress. When under stress, the brain is unable to achieve homeostasis. The addict in this situation may experience extreme craving, that is an intense emotional and obsessive experience. Next is choice. An addict may incur damage to the orbitofrontal cortex or the OFC. The anterior cingulate cortex, that is ACC, and the prefrontal cortex, that is PFC. This damage causes a tendency to choose small and immediate rewards over larger but delayed rewards. Next is addiction psychology. Simply stated, psychology is a science devoted to understand the human behavior. Psychologists are primarily concerned with improving the quality of people's life and their life satisfaction. Psychologists consider behaviors that promote people's well-being and life satisfaction adaptive behaviors. Contrary to this, the behaviors that serve to limit people's functioning, degrade their quality of life and diminish life satisfaction are termed as maladaptive behaviors. Since addiction is a harmful maladaptive behavior, psychological models are very useful in understanding why people get engaged in such an unhealthy behavior. Addiction psychology mostly comprises the disciplines of clinical psychology and abnormal psychology and fosters the application of information obtained from research in an effort to appropriately diagnose, evaluate, treat and support people dealing with addiction. Throughout the treatment process, addiction psychologists encourage behaviors that build wellness and the emotional resilience to their mental and emotional problems. The cardinal symptom of addiction is the inability to limit the use of a substance or the activity beyond need, leading to clinically significant impairment. There is a craving or compulsion to use the substance or the activity. Recurrent use of the drug or activity escalates to achieve the desired effect, indicating tolerance. Attempts to stop usage produce symptoms of withdrawal, irritability, anxiety, shakes, nausea. Recurrent use of the substance or activity impairs work, social and family responsibilities, creates psychological impairments and the interpersonal problems, and has negative effects on health, mood and self-respect intensified by the effects of the specific substance itself. Next comes the psychological dependence. Psychological dependence may be defined as the dependence on an psychoactive substance for the reinforcement it provides. Psychological dependence is actually a need for a particular substance because it causes enjoyable mental effects. Psychological addiction can theoretically form for any rewarding behavior or as a habitual means to avoid the undesired activity. The most common of the psychological addictions include dependency on such things such as gambling, eating, sex and pornography, internet use, work and shopping and spending money. It is possible to be both psychologically and physically addicted at the same time. Alcohol and drug addictions are very widespread in our society. The cause of this craving is heavily debated upon, but the most popular beliefs are: first is the chemical or the nutritional imbalance. Then next comes the genetic predisposition. Third is the neurological effect that is caused by runaway learning mechanisms. And fourth, an inability to curb one's own desire for enjoyment. Psychological addiction is also involved in both drug addiction and alcoholism, since many addicts believe that they gain benefit from the use of the substance. They may believe that the alcohol or other drug improves their ability to socialize, helps handle pressures, and allows them to feel superior to others, in that they can handle extreme intoxication, or that drinking allows them to fit into their peer group. These effects all contribute to a person's impression of the beneficial effects of the drug and alcohol in his or her life, and may result in a denial of the negative effects. It is important to recognize that many of these benefits can be real, not imagined. The person must be convinced of the net negative value of alcohol and drugs in their life before any treatment can have meaningful, lasting effects. Psychological dependence begins after the first trial, which satisfies a person, and the satisfaction increases with each use. This constant feeling leads to psychological reinforcement, which eventually leads to dependence. Along with substances, people can also become dependent on different activities like shopping, gambling, etc. When a psychologically dependent person attempts to recover, there are many withdrawal symptoms that can hinder his path. Some of the withdrawal symptoms include headache, poor judgment, trembling and shaking of hands, and loss of attention span and focusing. Psychological associations with addiction include mood disorders like depression, anxiety or bipolar disorder, thought disorders like schizophrenia, as well as personality disorders like antisocial personality disorder. Various studies have shown that men are more at risk for developing a chemical dependency like alcoholism, and women seem to be more vulnerable to becoming addicted to alcohol at much lower amounts of alcohol consumption. Next, we will study about the drugs and mental health. The meaning of mental health differs widely as it means different things to different people, but good health is usually a sign of a positive way of life. It can be affected by external influences, and one of these is drugs, especially these psychoactive ones. A psychoactive, psychopharmaceutical or psychotropic is a chemical substance that acts primarily upon the central nervous system, where it affects brain functioning, resulting in alteration in perception, mood, consciousness, cognition and behavior. These substances may be used recreationally to purposefully alter one's consciousness or for ritual, spiritual or shamanic purposes. Many psychoactive drugs also have the therapeutic utility, example as anesthetics, analgesics, or for the treatment of psychiatric disorders. Psychoactive substances often bring about subjective changes in consciousness and mood that the user may find pleasant, example euphoria, or advantageous, example increased alertness, and are thus reinforcing. Thus, many psychoactive substances are abused, that is, used excessively despite health risks or negative consequences. With sustained use of some of these substances, psychological and physical dependence, that is addiction, may develop. The short-term effects of such drugs may be enjoyable, but these drugs can have a long-lasting impact or experience on the mental health too. First is the short-term effects. All these psychoactive drugs may cause mental health problems. They include anxiety, mood swings, depression, sleep problems, and psychosis. First under this is drug-induced anxiety disorder. It includes panic attack, periods of very severe anxiety in which the heart rate increases with trembling, sweats, shortness of breath, and a fear of losing control. Surroundings are felt to be strange and unreal, resulting in loss of personal identity and sense of reality. Next comes the drug-induced psychosis. Psychoactive drugs can cause delusions, that is believing in things that aren't true, or hallucination, that is perception without any stimulus. Third, here is drug-induced mood disorder. Certain drugs may result in a feeling of depression which make the user sad, restless, irritable, tired, loss of pleasure, or conversely a feeling of maniac resulting in elevated mood, delusions, and impulsive behavior. Next we will study about the long-term effects. Long-term usage of psychoactive drugs may cause the ongoing mental health problems. Here are some of the ways that different drugs can affect the mental health. First is ecstasy and depression. Ecstasy is an amphetamine that causes hallucinations. It works by making serotonin more available and gives you a sense of euphoria when it is taken or ingested. Serotonin is a chemical naturally found in the brain which regulates mood. Ecstasy causes brain to release a much higher amount of serotonin than usual. If lots of serotonin means euphoria, then lack of serotonin means depression. Next is cannabis and schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a severe mental illness which may cause delusions and hallucinations. Research shows a link between cannabis and people suffering with schizophrenia. Addiction psychology mostly comprises the clinical psychology and the abnormal psychology disciplines and fosters the application of information obtained from research in an effort to appropriately diagnose, evaluate, treat, and support people dealing with addiction. Addiction is a condition that results when a person ingests a substance or engages in an activity that can be pleasurable, but the continuation of which becomes compulsive and interferes with ordinary life responsibilities such as work, relationships, or health. The addictive potential of a drug varies from substance to substance and also from individual to individual. Dose, frequency, pharmacokinetics of a particular substance, routes of administration, and time are the critical factors for developing a drug addiction. According to the new disease model, addiction is a disease of choice. That is, it is a disorder of the parts of the brain necessary to make proper decisions. An understanding of the impact that genes, reward, memory, stress, and choice is very necessary to explain the disease model of addiction. A psychoactive drug, psychopharmaceutical, or psychotropic drug is a chemical substance that acts primarily upon the central nervous system or the CNS, where it affects brain functioning, resulting in alterations in perception, mood, consciousness, cognition, and behavior. All psychoactive drugs may cause mental health problems. These can include anxiety, mood swings, depression, sleep problems, and psychosis.